Okay, so this screencast is all about the evolution of fire. And the way that I ran it last year was that um, I taught this lesson after the cut and paste activity that you did near the end of last term, where you tried to put all of the key points into two columns referring to either biological evolution or cultural evolution. If you have that on you, I'd like you to pause here and go and have another look at it and answer the question here in bold, which is, what is the biggest difference between the development of cultural evolution and biological evolution? And what I'm hoping that you recognize is that the the really essential key distinction between these two forms of evolution is speed, or the rate at which it can propagate throughout the population. So biological evolution, we know, is the result of a mutation happening in one individual randomly, probably during the synthesis of that gamete, and um, that mutation being passed on to the direct offspring of that one individual, and then their offspring, and so on and so forth. And if it does confer a survival advantage, we expect to see it increase in frequency in the gene pool of that population. So biological evolution happens over thousands and thousands of generations. It takes that long for a certain phenotype to be what we call fixed in the population. So for everyone in that population to, at some point, um, receive that trait. So that would take many generations. And that's because information can only be passed from parent to offspring. Whereas cultural evolution can propagate within a population instantly. So it's all about teaching and learning of skills and ideas. And yeah, it can happen instantly through both space and time. So you can teach the people in your area, and you can also teach in you can teach the generation above and below you. And so you see there that the arrows are double-ended. So you could teach your parents something, you could teach your children something, you could teach your peers something. And so the number and direction of those arrows really represents how quickly ideas can spread within a community in terms of evolution of culture. Um, so this is why we see that language, art, spirituality, and such have developed over just a few thousand years. However, we still have, for example, vestigial tails or tailbones that we haven't used since before our common ancestor with chimps over 6 million years ago when we used to live in the trees, right? But the selection against um, the genes that code for the phenotype that creates a longer spine, you know, the selection pressure on that is not strong enough to be getting rid of that trait quickly. It's going to take hundreds of thousands of generations for that tail to disappear unless there's a really significant need for it, which there's not. So hopefully that that's a really long-winded way of me saying that the biggest distinction to make between biological and cultural evolution is the speed at which it can propagate. And I would suggest you write down, if you didn't, I put up these slides, I'm sure. If I haven't, someone let me know. But if you haven't written down the definitions of biological and cultural evolution, these come up a lot. So I would highly suggest getting your head around a really succinct definition. And you know what? You can draw diagrams in your exams as well, and they can be a really great way of communicating an idea with the examiner. So yeah, the fire PowerPoint that I'm about to go through extends off of this idea. So we're entering cultural evolution as of today. We're going to explore lots of different cultural ideas like fire, tools, hunting, clothing, speech, blah, 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 blah. So yeah, I just wanted to touch on that first. Is there anything else in here? Nope. Okay. Sorry that this was all like small screen. I just knew I was going to be jumping around, so I can go big now. All right, so today we are looking at the use of fire throughout evolution. And the learning objectives for this topic, fire, are really the umbrella intention is for you to be able to explain how the controlled use of fire led to advancements in both cultural and biological evolution. So using fire changed our culture and changed our physiology and our anatomy. So it's important that you understand the links between all of these ideas. You should be able to discuss why the evolution of our relatively large, energy expensive brains could not have been possible without the ability to control fire. Sorry if I sound really out of breath. I'm like lying on my stomach on the bed because I've been sitting at a desk all day and now I'm like, my weight is making this hard. And then describe how the use of fire would have provided an adaptive advantage in terms of warmth, exploiting new habitats, protection, social interactions, hunting, blah, blah, blah. So lots of different ways that fire really provided adaptive advantage to human evolution. All right, so I would pause here if I were you and go into the slide version of the screencast and watch this video, or you can look it up on YouTube, how fire and lava may have made us who we are. So yeah, come back to the screencast once you've watched the video because it'll make a lot more sense. Okay, so the main idea in that video is basically that there was a chicken and egg situation between fire and brains. How could we have controlled fire without a relatively large and intelligent brain? But how could we have possibly developed such a large brain without the benefits that we received from fire, such as cooking our food and gaining all the additional nutrients that we could from that? So, you know, how possibly could this chain have started? And there's a lot of interconnected evidence that suggests we were using fire before we were able to understand or control it. In terms of exploiting wildfires and lava and things like that, until that was able to, over hundreds of thousands of years, influence our biology through the way that we were able to use the additional energy that we gained from cooking our food to grow our brains, to start to understand fire, to maintain it, then to create it ourselves, which would have come a lot further, a lot later, and then finally to control it. So yeah, so that's kind of filling in the blanks as to where it all came from. Not essential that you understand that background, but you know, it really bugged me when I didn't understand how this was possible. So I thought, I don't know, it's just an interesting point. What's next? So evidence for the use of fire. The earliest evidence we have is around 600,000 years ago, and those pieces of evidence are charred bones and other residue that are found in caves because this is where it was able to be preserved. And yeah, that shows that there's evidence of cooking and not only using fire, which is quite interesting. Again, remembering from our hominins lessons that we attribute the very first use of fire to Homo erectus. Okay, so the uses of fire. I'd like you to stop here and think about all of the uses of fire, you know, all of the ways that fire could have benefited humans throughout evolution. So I'll give you one to start. Light. So fire provides us with light. What are some others? There's at least 5, 6, 7 ideas there. 2, warmth. So we can use fire for warmth, cooking food, hunting, protection. These are kind of secondary uses in my personal opinion. Art and spirituality and communication and all of those ideas. Hardening materials in order to make tools. So what's essential for this unit is that we understand, number one, what fire provided for us. Number 2, how that led to evolution and culture. And number 3, how that cultural evolution led to changes in our biology. So we're going to go through these step by step. And those things at the bottom were supposed to be part of my cool new animations that I've learnt, but it didn't work. So pretend those are not there for now. Okay, number 1, light. So light enabled humans to increase their own daylight hours, which led to more time for activities such as tool making, communicating with one another, kind of campfire singing, not quite, not yet, socializing, hunting. So enabling us to have more hours in the day sped up our opportunity for improvement. Number 2 I've got here is warmth. So fire provides us with heat, and heat or warmth allowed us to expand into areas that were originally deemed too cold to survive. So we attribute the dispersal of hominins outside of Africa to Homo erectus, and it would make sense that the use of fire, which erectus had been working on, I guess, for a couple of 100,000 years, allowed them to exploit new areas in Europe and Asia that they wouldn't have been able to without a source of heat. So human dispersal allowed for the exploitation of resources in new areas, and this reduced direct competition between humans, which would have allowed populations to get larger. Number 3, cooking. Cooking our food processes it in a way that reduces the time and energy we have to spend on digesting it. And in terms of cultural evolution, reducing the effort it took to eat would have left more time in the day for activities, again, such as tool making, socializing, and etc. So on this slide, I'm looking purely at how did fire affect culture. All right, still on the idea of cooking. Cooking our meat led to reduction in death and disease as a result of pathogens and bacteria in the food, and also toxins, mild toxins that you get in some vegetation that would have been removed. So this is going to improve quality of life in the community. And a last point that I would make about cooking is that we could actually exploit difficult resources like potatoes and starchy roots and expand our diet as a whole and not rely on one specific niche, such as that of Paranthropus, for example. So they had such a specific diet that they were adapted to that their survivability was low when environmental changes shifted their selection pressures. At the bottom, you can see some secondary uses of fire, in my personal opinion. So, scaring predators and protecting the community against predators and perhaps other, I don't know, tribes, you might call them, of hominins as well. Hardening tools, hunting, art, and spirituality. These are all really useful uses of fire, but yeah, I would stick to the top 3 there, as there's just so much to unpack. So, how can we relate that cultural evolution to how it affected the body over time? Again, animations suck. Well, me setting up the animations, I suck. So ignore that, and I'm going to pretend that's not there for a sec. Number 1, light. So we talked about how light allowed for hominins to increase their usable daylight hours. And this would have provided, among other things, more social time. So there's an increased selection pressure on adaptations that allow for a greater ability to communicate. And this, over time, would have led to conducive shifts in the skull for communication, such as the shape of the dental arcade becoming more parabolic than parallel, which allowed us to have, greater use of our mouths and tongue for speech. The jaw becoming more gracile and useful in communication and speech, and the chin, so our distinctly human chin, evolved for a number of reasons that I touched on in the skeleton screencast or slides. But yeah, a lot of shifts that were conducive to the improvement of speech turning into language, so using sound to communicate ideas. And again, it's nice to recognize that a lot of this involves positive feedback. So the more that we could communicate, oh, I'm about to run out of time. See you in a minute.